Welcome to everyone to our next seminar in the Horizon 2055 series. And today it's my pleasure to introduce to you Matthias. I haven't practiced it much, Pauwels. My apologies up front for doing you no justice in terms of proper pronunciation. But the title of Matthias's talk is Barbarians of the Minoritarian Imagination, Yousfi on the Politics of Rap. So, if I understand correctly, what you're going to be talking about is the reclaiming of your future by breaking out of the stereotype and the kind of stereotype that comes about through majoritarian-integrationist sort of integrating into society, into the majority view of the world. Of that society, or communitarian-identitarian. So what the community demands of you in terms of your identity, or forces
Yes.
on you in terms of identity. So my PhD was in race and on complexity, and that race was a complex system. So I'm very fascinated to hear how these Arab rap artists, or African rap artists in France, in the poor areas, are able to use rap as a music, or use music as a means to break out of that sort of system that is enclosed around them. So Matthias is looking very forward to it. Matthias is a researcher and lecturer at Northwestern University, and it's a beautiful day in the Bay today. I just have to plug it before we go any further. Then I swam with about a pod of 500 dolphins this morning. And so you can't have better, but this is a nice bookend to the day. So Matthias, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you to continue, and then we'll go through. Thanks very much for that, Matthias.
Thank you also very much for inviting me. I might surprise you because, in a sense, the crux of the argument of the specific theorist I'm looking into today is actually not so much saying that these minorities that are living in France have to break out of the stereotypes, but almost the opposite. They sort of are affirming or imaginatively affirming those stereotypes as a way to break out all kinds of mechanisms of oppression. So it's actually the other way around. Interestingly
Okay,
enough,
fantastic.
paradox. Okay, so let me just share my presentation again. Share. All right, and so okay. Sorry, yeah, I'll just press play now. Okay, okay. I hope that went well. Okay, right. So let me start. So I apologize if perhaps at some point I'll just read through my slides at this stage of the Friday of the week. My brain is also not so prone to improvisation anymore. So sometimes I'll just read through the slides a little bit, which will also allow me to make good progress, as obviously we also have limited time. Okay, so my title, Barbarians of the Minoritarian Imagination. It's a bit of a mouthful. Partly the inspiration for this title was by phrase that was coined by the movie director Jim Jarmusch, which perhaps some of you know, some of you don't. It's a kind of a cult movie director. And he particularly coined this phrase in relation to a rather famous rap collective, which is called the Wu-Tang Clan. That was specifically said in a documentary on the Wu-Tang Clan entitled Wu-Tang Clan of Mics and Men. So for those who are not familiar with rap music, so Wu-Tang Clan was a sort of a rap formation that came through in the mid-90s, consisting of a bunch of MCs, and which actually was one of the first really rap bands that came from the underground scene from New York. that got a kind of global acclaim. And so as you can see, this phrase, Warriors of the Imagination, inspired my title. Two aspects. On the one hand, the warriors bit. The fact that rap artists are kind of warriors. They are in war, you could say. Obviously, the rap genre is a minoritarian genre par excellence. It sort of started in the ghettos in New York. Black people in the United States invented this music genre, and obviously they were fighting against a lot of challenges in their lives. And then the other bit that's important is the imagination, right? Because especially also in the interpretation of minoritarian rap music that I will be focusing on in this lecture, the imagination plays a key part, which is also why when I read the description of the seminars, I immediately thought, okay, maybe I should do something on that. Okay, so let me just quickly say one more thing about Jim Jarmusch. Jim Jarmusch also made a movie where he used rap as a kind of soundtrack, and this movie, sorry, even my speech is impacted by the Friday afternoon situation. This movie is entitled Ghost Dog, and the soundtrack was actually made by the DJ of the Wu-Tang Clan, the RZA, who also featured in the movie. And so obviously Jim Jarmusch, he also openly professes that he really is inspired by the rap genre. So let me just quickly, these are some scenes from that movie Ghost Dog, which I'll just say one more few little things about in just a second. But so Jim Jarmusch says in this quote, he says, for me, hip hop is about the love of language and the beauty of language and the amazing things you can do with it. Right? Then he says of the situation in the United States that we actually live in a kind of apartheid. And then also, again, in this documentary, he goes on to say that especially oppressed people around the world, it is the case that you cannot really destroy the strength of ideas, and that the Wu-Tang Clan celebrates that. And then he says they are warriors of the imagination, and the power of the imagination is far stronger than guns or money. This just to give you some context as to that phrase, the warriors of the imagination. And interestingly, this movie, Ghost Dog, is about this lone assassin who, in a sense, is inspired by some of the ancient wisdoms of samurai culture in Japan. And he even sort of imagines himself to be kind of samurai. So he reads these old texts that sort of describe the code of honor of the samurai. He practices the samurai sword, and his entire sort of way of living is inspired by that ancient warrior culture. And for Jim Jarmusch, this is sort of a sign of how people in very oppressed situations. This main character, he lives in a sort of a black ghetto, industrial wasteland, that through the imagination, he somehow regains a sense of control over his life and perhaps dignity. Right. Okay, so this is just to contextualize a little bit what inspired me. Then the main inspiration, or the main also focus of the lecture, is on this book that was written by Louisa Yousfi, who is a journalist, writer. She studied philosophy. She was not like an academic philosopher in any sense, but also she's an activist. She's a French citizen, but she has Algerian roots, and she's also active in an organization in France that is called the Party of the French Republic's Indigenous People, which is a sort of so obviously France had a very extensive colonialist and imperialist history. So there's a lot of people from the colonies that sort of at some point moved to France and are living nowadays as a minority. They're French citizens, but obviously they still have roots in the Arab or the African world. And this is also the case for Yousfi. So this book it's not a typical philosophy book or theory book. It's also sort of a manifest. It's also kind of autobiographical work. So let me just quickly say a few things about this book. So it addresses the marginalized position of especially non-white and Western minorities in France, and mainly from an Arab and African origin. And it criticizes existing integrationist discourses and policies in France. So it has a very strong critical take on this it's almost also an ideology in France that people with foreign roots, it's important that they integrate in French society and take over their norms and values. And Yousfi regards this integrationist thinking as a kind of continuation of France's problematic colonialist, imperialist civilization drive that has historically been directed at its barbarian others. So now, for the first time, but the barbarian aspects also comes into play. So I'm just saying a couple of things in general about the book. So this book also criticizes some common minoritarian coping and resistance strategies. So it's not just a critique of the policies and official policies and discourses. She also looks at the way in which minorities themselves have sort of tried to handle or deal with this situation that they find themselves in, being pressured into integrating. And then the main thing is, or what I think is very innovative in this book, is that she identifies a very remarkable alternative minoritarian resistance strategies, which basically consists of these non-Western French minorities of endorsing their imposed inferior barbarian status. So in that sense, it's very different from trying to fight the stereotypes. It's the strategy, which the title suggests, Rester barbare, means remaining barbarian, is actually to sort of endorse that barbarian stigma that has been placed on those minorities. And some of the most emblematic applications of this barbarian strategies are found in creative works of minoritarian novelists, and also what I will be focusing on contemporary rap musicians from those minorities. And the strategy, you could say, is defended by Yousfi as an effective means for minorities to fend off both, on the one hand, integrationist majoritarian pressures, but also communitarian and identitarian pressures, which, as Gary rightly sort of has sketched, obviously there are also certain pressures from within the minority community itself as to, how to behave, as to one's identity and so on. And the strategy is also meant, and this is perhaps the most important thing also in the context of the seminars, it's also about creating a mental and an affective space for autonomously imagining one's identity and future as a minority. Okay, so this quote from Yousfi, where she says, "Nothing is left of us," this can be seen as how Yousfi assesses what she sees as the imminent destiny of non-Western marginalized minorities in France. And this refers to their increasing and seemingly unstoppable domestication by and absorption in the majoritarian society. So on the one hand, this is most obviously caused by certain integrationist pressures from the majority society, which very often bring minorities then to try and convince the white French minority of their similar humanity. So this is a typical way in which minorities in France have dealt with the situation or with this integrationist pressure that they're faced with. However, for Yousfi, this is not really satisfactory response, or she argues that on one hand it's futile to try and do so as a minority, to try and convince the majority that you're also equally human or similarly human as them. For instance, just to mention one critique, she says that it actually catches minorities in this kind of endless training process where they constantly have to prove their equal humanity to the white French. And she also sees it as psychologically damaging to those minorities, for instance, mentioning self-hatred and shame. Most importantly, however, Yousfi also questions the worthiness of white Frenchness as an aspirational goal for minorities, for instance, contesting its pretensions to being the universal benchmark of civilized humanity. And she, for instance, here refers to France's imperialist atrocities as a kind of proof to the contrary of the French being some kind of benchmark for universal humanity that minorities would have to sort of emulate. However, a second more, perhaps less obvious and more insidious way in which minorities tend to be absorbed and domesticated is identified in the attempt by minorities to actually counter their negative majoritarian representations, to counter their negative stereotypes. And according to her, this is mainly done through producing a kind of unambiguously positive self-representation. So she here uses the term hagiographic, which comes from hagiography, which means the writing of the life of saints. So it means a very sort of euphemistic writing on the life of saints. And she basically says that in order to sort of fight the stereotypes that they're confronted with, minorities resort to writing a kind of hagiographies of their own communities. So she, for instance, speaks of narratives of one's own greatness as a minority. She also speaks of the decolonial ego trip. So on the one hand, she believes that this would satisfy this would satisfy a kind of vital need of these minorities to have, she puts it, to have their beauty augmented, hyperbolized, and to intoxicate themselves with pride. And as such, this could be seen as minorities' way of overcompensating for the devastating impact on their sense of self-identity and self-worth due to majoritarian oppression and stereotypes. So while on the one hand she's sympathetic, she understands why minorities would sort of opt for such an approach, she also criticizes such hagiographic self-representations for mainly producing a kind of good, inoffensive, bland, and transparent copies of these minoritarian communities, which, according to him, robs them of their depth and density. And the problem with that is that this is then taken to facilitate the co-option, the majoritarian co-option of these minorities through certain processes of cultural recuperation and exploitation. So because they present themselves in such a nice huggable format or palatable format, you could say, minorities can then easily be co-opted by the majoritarian societies. So here, interestingly, she also sees minorities' desire for universal and majoritarian recognition of their identity and beauty as a key problem. So minorities, they like to be liked. They like their identity to be celebrated. They like their beauty to be seen. And especially that is a problem because then they sanitize their self-identity and then they become prone to being co-opted. Another problem that she sees is that it also results in a kind of pressure, a pressure, especially towards intellectuals or artists in minority communities to always represent their communities in an exclusively good and dignified light and thereby suppress any form of self-criticism they might have. She here also refers to prominent minoritarian figures being transformed into, as she calls it, objects of consumption, and being propagated and glamorized as a kind of ambassadors of urban culture. I just added a photograph here of a famous Dutch rapper, which at some point is from Moroccan origin, but he's a Dutch citizen. At some point, he was sort of the darling of the media world in the Netherlands because he had such a huggable sort of character. It was always fun and this and that. And these are the type of sanitized minoritarian others that are sort of then co-opted by the system. And interestingly, she also alludes to her own co-option. And she says that even herself, being a critical figure in sort of of a French non-Western majority, that even she is sort of co-opted as she nicely describes it, as a beautiful native who speaks dominations and racism with grace and sophistication. So she basically says the majoritarian society is able to sort of co-opt minorities insofar as they present themselves as whether beautiful or sophisticated in how they can criticize even majoritarian society. Okay. So now, according to her, so these sort of common approaches to deal with these pressures, both from the majority as well as from within the minority, are problematic. So she looks for a way out. So basically, how I would describe her aim, so to speak. I see the time is really going fast. Okay, let me go a little bit faster. So the aim is that she tries to imagine the minoritarian self beyond what she calls saintliness, exemplarity, and beauty. So she tries to sort of break out of these two dominant ways of dealing with the pressures they are faced with. So both integrationist and hagiographic pressures are thus seen to contribute to minorities' domestication by and absorption in the majority society, and often with minorities' own complicity. So the alternative barbarian minoritarian strategy is then proposed as a way to save what is left of us. We've seen that she sort of feels that, there's a real threat that soon nothing will be left of them as a minority due to all these pressures. So this strategy then involves a bold break with and even an inversion both of the integrationist and the hagiographic minoritarian approaches. As minorities within this alternative strategy are no longer endeavoring to challenge their imposed inferior barbarian status or identity by either demonstrating their equal human status or the equal value of their particular culture or identity. In contrast, the barbarian approach involves a minority's acceptance and even endorsement of its misrecognized status. Yousfi identifies the fundamental strategic maneuver here in terms of the appropriation of an oppressor's insult or stigma or stereotype by its targets. And this would be done in such a way as to reverse its dominant negative status or meaning. For example, turning the insult into a badge of honor, and as such repurpose it as a kind of weapon against the majority or the oppressor. Now, the inspiration for the strategy came from a Algerian writer, novelist, playwright, Kateb Yassine. He's a contemporary of Fanon. And in his work, she saw a kind of barbarian turn or application of this barbarian strategy. And she specifically focused on a statement, autobiographical statement that Yassine made at some point where he said that he had so much to say that it was better for him not to be too cultured and safeguard a kind of barbarity, to remain barbarian, which is obviously where she then took the title from. So the significance of this statement is traced back to Yassine's coming of age as a colonized subject in French Algeria. Yassine was a member of the indigenous aristocracy and as such enjoyed access to the French Republican education. And as such, he was well on track to lose his allotted imposed barbarian status and become recognized as civilized in the French colonialist terms. At the age of 16, however, he witnessed the French colonizers' barbarous suppression of anti-colonial Algerian nationalist protests at the end of World War II. And while imprisoned for his involvement, Yassine realized the futility of his nascent integrated status, as he was treated no different from his common illiterate barbarian Algerian fellow prisoners. This led him then to endorse his assigned barbarian status, reasoning that if a barbarian I am, in the colonizer's ultimate estimation, despite being educated, he's still being seen as barbarian, then barbarian I also want to remain. Yousfi voices sort of the reasoning that Yassine took in that situation. Henceforth, Yassine devoted his life and work to vindicating his supposed barbarous race as a public scribe. Okay. So if Yassine was sort of the main sort of inspiration for this thinking in terms of a barbarian strategy, a minoritarian counter strategy, then rappers in the banlieues of France are seen as the most contemporary application of this strategy, even if this is obviously unself-conscious. They're not consciously applying the strategy. Yousfi, in a sense, identifies the strategy in their work. Okay, so it concerns rap artists who are French citizens but have Arab or African roots. So they live, they mostly operate in the so-called banlieues, which are socially depressed suburban neighborhoods with high concentrations of French citizens with an immigration background. And Yousfi specifically focuses on the work of Booba. He's a solo rap artist, and then also a rap duo, PNL. And I'll mainly sort of explain in the leftover of what's still left of the lecture how she identifies this barbarian strategy and Booba's work. Okay, so Booba grew up as a French youngster. Was raised by a white mother in a predominantly white environment. And even though he had his father was Senegalese, so he had Senegalese roots, given the context in which he was brought up, he was actually destined to become an integrated French citizen. However, at the age of 10, he undertook a trip to Senegal, including to the slave island of Gorée. And apparently there he would have sort of made a strange turn, and in a sense deciding to, instead of going the route of integration, to instead affirm his barbarous roots. And when he started to make rap music, he took on a persona, the persona of Booba, and which is actually named after a Senegalese cousin. Okay. Now, so in one sense, this persona, this rap persona, in one way, it is a way for Booba to adopt certain racist stereotypes of banlieusards with African roots. So in that sense, again, it's very different from fighting the stereotypes. Now, in a sense, the persona of Booba consists of identifying with these racist stereotypes. For instance, of being violent, being savage animals, people living in these areas, and to use it as a kind of weapon against the white French. So the rap persona Booba is seen to be crafted as an imaginary avenger of the Senegalese victims of France's horrid practices of slavery and colonialism. Or as Yousfi also puts it, Booba is meant to be a force descended from Africa, a black hero returning to revenge his ancestors. So this is already telling about how kind of imagined persona is sort of used, which consists of certain racist stereotypes, is used as a way as a weapon, so to speak. So I'm just giving you also this quote. So Yousfi says, the response must match the crime. Booba wants to be the realization of the white French people's racist fantasies and their conjuring. His body sculpted like armor, he will be a thug, a dealer, a murderer, an animal. He will be a figure of the evil they have created and who comes to settle the score, to complete the circle. Okay. So, so I just want to say, I mean, obviously, Yousfi is also interpreting a lot, but she does so in such a beautiful way. She's kind of trying to interpret what, I mean, obviously referring to some of the lyrics of Booba and some of his sort of performative aspects in sort of constructing her interpretation. Okay, so however, it's not just about, and that she emphasizes this, it's not just about merely acting as a kind of monstrous creation of the French, because then she feels that you would reduce yourself to the product of the oppressor. And that's positioning she also refuses. So in terms of its emancipatory force, the key is in the imagining. So the fact that Buber tries to imagine and even become who, as she puts it, who he should have been if it wasn't for France's problematic interference in his native Senegal. And Buber is mainly seen to do so by creating an entire inner world from empire's margins, wherein non-Western minority groups in France's banlieues heroically feature as, she puts it, as pirates, as UFOs, as shadow warriors, as escapees from the Matrix, or super Saiyans with unlimited powers. And so there's a lot of imagination going on and sort of working on these stereotypes of them as barbarians. So for Yousfi, these are all figures that she likens to barbarians in the Homeric sense, a kind of impenetrable power springing from the limbs of civilization. So nicely phrased. Okay. So, so through this elaborate symbolic universe, Yousfi also speaks of an emancipatory mythology. Buber is seen to produce some of the most epic stories of the condition of Blacks and Arabs in France. Minoritarian groups are thereby made to be seen and known differently from the dominant one-dimensional, diminishing and condescending ways. But again, it's not by fighting the stereotypes, it's by reimagining these stereotypes in a kind of heroic sense, you could also say. So in that sense, Buber would stage minorities' grand but forced entry into world history. So then she focuses on one specific trope of the barbarian, which is that of the pirate or piracy. In the work of Buber, and especially there, the aspect of imagination is elaborated very specifically. So, so basically, a first trope of piracy in Buber's work is that of the retrieval of the treasures stolen by Western colonizers from non-Western people. So according to Yousfi, this is a way of Buber of imagining what one could be if one was not poor and hence not subjected to the related social determinisms and dependency on the white French civilizers. So by imagining to recapture the treasures stolen from you, obviously then you're wealthy again. So as such, it would enable minorities to imaginatively live an unshackled existence because they're no longer financially dependent on the oppressor. And even to actually feel liberated. So that's also an important statement, that the music of Buber also gives you that feeling of being liberated. You might be dirt poor, but at least it gives you that sense. And as such, also to allow minorities to speak truth to one's oppressors, as one need not fear any economic repercussions. Then a second set of liberatory meanings and effects are attributed to Buber's enjoinment towards non-Western French minorities to endorse a piratic maritime life. This is identified as a key political fiction in Buber's musical universe, where the high seas are seen to represent a kind of eternal and impregnable space of resistance, where the laws and of the land are suspended, and where states struggle to control their borders. She also speaks of the place of all possibilities. So, so again, this is about Buber's music. In Buber's music, minorities are kind of reimagined as nomadic communities of marauding pirates. And as such, these minorities would be enabled through listening to the music, obviously, to muster the courage to be themselves and to express the political virtualities of which they are deprived on dry land. So these are some of the ways in which these barbarian stereotypes about minorities, kind of minorities to which Buber belongs, that are sort of reimagined in such a way as to become a kind of political tool of empowerment, of emancipation. So, okay, so I realize I'm going over the half hour. So let me, I only have this quote and one concluding slide. So let me just read this passage because I think it's beautiful, and I think it also sums up a lot of the things I've been sort of dealing with. So it's the concluding part to her interpretation of Buber. So she says, rap music is a permanent clash. It's an art of warfare. It's the movement of the sea, eternal and unassailable. The marquee of the pirates, where the laws of the mainland are suspended and where states themselves struggle to control their borders. It's the place where everything is possible. The storyteller, in this case Booba, the rap artist, is saying that we are losers here on land, so in France. But off the coast, a mental horizon is taking shape. Are we, as a minority, going to continue to scratch out a living, a few scraps of civilized land, or are we going to rally to the Jolly Roger, which is obviously the pirate logo? Disillusioned, the resistance may be, but it is also re-energized by the sheer panache and the pride of the pirates. Should we negotiate our slice of the action or work tirelessly to translate the pirate legend into a political reality? The outcome of this would be unpredictable, to say the least. But this political fiction at least has the merit of re-injecting some vitality into the enterprise. Become what we should have been, a maxim that evokes the dizzying ocean depths where it becomes possible to rediscover ourselves or lose ourselves forever. Okay, so right. So in conclusion, so through a kind of imaginary identification with and a creative exploration of their imposed barbarian nature and identity, these minoritarian rappers from the banlieue are thus seen to free the minoritarian imagination from integrationist and communitarian pressures, and as such, they would allow minorities to map out their own destiny without majoritarian manipulation or interference, which is an endeavor that is conceived as an uncertain, never-ending journey of becoming and losing oneself. Okay. So that's that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Matthias. And yeah, there we go. Fantastic. So just to say that I was really deeply struck by the presentation in terms of the I mean, you basically sketched that minorities have two options. In either one is to integrate fully into the new society, or to become the beautiful exotic, the thing that is admired as a, the parrot in the cage kind of thing. And that what the barbarian is trying to or is taking back the barbarian identity, is trying to imagine beyond what is, to become what we should have been. Now, that become what should have been is quite an interesting thing for me in terms of how do you know what you should have been? You know, can you go back 100 years and draw a different trajectory and say, okay, that's the trajectory it should have been?
Yes.
So yeah, so Matthias, I think very interesting. And let's see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I would be very keen for you to just talk about trajectories
Yes, yeah.
from, in terms of, how does the pirate create a new trajectory for
Yes, yeah, yeah.
people living in the banlieues, the banlieues.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But just to perhaps first, yeah, can I first respond to this?
One first, yeah, then
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, because interestingly, she also differentiated between this idea of imagining what we should have been and imagining what we would have been. And basically, what she completely denies or rejects this option that we should somehow sort of go back to a kind of pre-colonial barbarian identity. That's not what she is about. So it's a very future-minded reimagining of what we should have been. So I think in the should, there's that gap where the imagination can play can be set free, so to speak. So that's a nuance. I thought I just mentioned this because indeed you could sort of think, oh yeah, does she wants these minorities to just simply go back to their traditions, to this kind of pre-colonial bliss or whatever? So she's very critical of that as well. It's very future oriented, this project, which is also, you can also see in the kind of ways in which the barbarian are imagined. They're more science fiction sometimes. Like for instance, something I did not know, but these Super Saiyans are, there's some kind of game. What is it? Z-Ball. It's some kind of futuristic video game, and rappers use these references as a kind of way to reimagine the barbarian. So these specific group that is mentioned is a barbarian race that lives on some planet or something. So it's very much futuristic, you could say.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Matthias. Andrew, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, it's just a philosophical quibble or worry in a way. I mean, I very much like your idea of this call to or rally to the Jolly Roger in its kind of futurist sense. I think that's lovely. But what I do worry about is the kind of almost like the parasitic status of the pirate. That a pirate is always parasitic on the culture in which it kind of is, pirating so there's a sense in which the idea that your rally to the Jolly Roger is going to kind of endorse the barbarian imagination. There's something about that really just bothers me. It basically means you're taking the imagination of the dominant culture always as the starting point, and you figure yourself as antagonistic towards that.
Yes, yeah.
So that happens if you take the stereotype and you reimagine the stereotype in a heroic sense. If you, whatever it is, you are still responding in an antagonistic way to a dominant imagination that has already formed you. And you're not actually sailing out onto the high seas and doing something creative and imaginative that does not revert back all the time to the kind of dominant imagination. You're constantly having to force yourself to form yourself against that or in relation to that in some way.
That's I think a valid critique. I mean, obviously, I'm also sort of looking at the argument of Yousfi herself, and she is very careful to differentiate. I don't know if she's successful enough to in doing so, to differentiate her barbarian strategy from, for instance, Islam fundamentalist terrorism. And for instance, she criticizes terrorists precisely for sort of reducing themselves to a product of Western society. So there she sort of says that for some reason, sort of they reduce themselves to the product of the liberal Western West, and in that sense she sees it as a kind of merely reactive form of barbarism. Which in a sense she is equally, I mean, apart from not condoning violence, real violence, she's also against. She's also, and then the second category is kind of symbolic lashing out, where what you also sometimes see, where everything that the West stands for is then sort of insulted, whether it is. For instance, I mean, liberal Western society is obviously often seen as tolerant towards homosexuality, towards women, sort of women rights and this and that. And obviously, you also have a lot of there's also a lot of rap music that sort of is very negative, misogynistic, or is homophobic. So she does seems to kind of say that's not the way we should go. It's about the reimagining. And of course, you are right. It's still reimagining a majoritarian stereotype. And she's definitely not saying that minorities are in some way barbarian. So it's really about playing with the stigma that has been placed on you. And I think it's valid. Yeah, you still take something from the opponent, and you use it as a way to sort of try to map a line of flight, so to speak, to get away from it. But I think in her sense, what is also important is she sees it as a strategy. And she believes that if somebody insults you, and you, instead of trying to say, no, I'm not like that, or this or that, she sees it as much more effective to say, okay, well, if you say so, then I'm barbarian, and then run away with it. So she also sees it as a way of deflecting, the sort of this stereotyping process. So you could say that's a strategy, and as a strategy, it's not supposed to necessarily be the end all of your project, so to speak, or your opposition. So I can't really completely. I mean, the question is, do I agree with you? Would it be better for minorities in such a situation to have a kind of resistance that gets away entirely from that finds an entirely original point of departure or flight line? Would that be better? Or should we ask the question, is that realistic? Is that, I mean, obviously, one always thinks within a certain situation. For instance, if you are a sort of marginalized youth, racially discriminated against, living in these conditions, to what, in what sense do you have the resources to really, but what are you working with in terms of trying to resist or oppose your oppression? So I guess her answer would perhaps be, yeah, they work with the stereotypes, the labels that they're that are sort of imposed on them, and then they sort of it's also an act of defiance, right? To say, I mean, you could call me whatever. I'll heroically reinvent it into some kind of empowering something that would empower me, or would So yeah, but I think that's a very valid point. Perhaps because I know, Andrea, you also a bit into the Guattarian, Deleuzian conceptual space, so to speak. It is, although she only mentions through a secondary source, she refers to Deleuze, and not specifically related to barbarianism. There is a lot of sort of language that is used that sort of remind me of, let's say, the War Machine, where rap is sort of seen as a Deleuzian Guattarian war machine. This deterritorialization, getting away from thinking in territorial strategies where you integrate yourself in a territory, and there's the sea as a kind of nomadic space. There's a lot of, and I still need to flesh that out. I'm also not 100% conversant in that terminology, but I think, yeah.
Matthias?
I think, yeah. Oh, sorry, Gary. I was going to say Awanga has his hand up, so
yes.
Okay.
Go for it, Awanga.
No, I don't interject on the conversation between. I just wanted to if Andrea could remind me how exactly did she problematize this interaction between what is imposed on the people and them making these raps or responding to it to empower themselves, because I think in any instance that there is people who are living together and in a situation whereby one has subjugated the other, they still need to interact nonetheless, and there are still going to be conceptions or beliefs about the other group in both groups actually. So there are things I believe that the minor group would impose into the majority group, and there are things that the majority group imposes on the minority group. And so nonetheless, there's going to have to be an interaction. So I was just trying to imagine a situation whereby they could, the minority group or the subjugated group could develop a way of being that has nothing to do with the conceptions that have been used to subjugate them. And I just couldn't imagine anything possible, at least in so long as they still live in the same environment.
Yeah. So, Andrew, I don't know if you got that. The question, as I understand it, is basically how do you determine a new creative self without reference to where you find yourself at, you know?
Yeah, without the context in which you are. Maybe you can't. I think it's more a power kind of a power issue where, I mean, I suppose the source that I'm thinking about is Hegel, believe it or not, who basically insists, and I'm not sure if he's right. It'll be interesting to kind of think about this in practice, but he's basically saying, well, you will never get to the point of regaining your power if you are antagonistic and always fighting against the oppressor. The idea is turn your back on that, shrug it off, however that is possible. And I don't know, I think you might be right. It might be very, very difficult in a situation where there are so many discrepancies and power discrepancies already. But if there were a way in which you could imagine your existence where you turn your back on power and, well, Hegel says refashion yourself through work, and I think he means creative work too. So refashion yourself in a way that is giving the power dynamic a cold shoulder, not a cold shower, sorry. So that in a sense you're turning your back on power, and that is not difficult. I mean, not difficult. It's not easy. It's flippin' difficult. But that, I think, would be the source of reimagining in a creative way, is to actually turn your back on this discourse of war and revenge and avenging and weapons and settling scores and that kind of dynamic. I think somehow one would have to think creatively about how you could refashion yourself through creative work rather than fighting the antagonistic fight for the rest of the time. So that's just where it comes from, but I'm completely with Awanga there. I'm not sure about the practicalities of it. That's a blue sky philosophy, that if we could imagine our lives differently, maybe we could, when the eco crisis hits and we all have to work together, maybe we're not going to be sitting there fighting our identity fights anymore. I'm not sure. But yeah, okay. So that, I mean, that's a long way of saying not too much. Does that sort of help a bit? No longer?
But it just made me wonder maybe if by turning this cold shoulder, perhaps we could do it still in a contextualized sense, that now you adapting to the environment and taking your power in the environment, not in the sense of trying to fight back or trying to get revenge, but using what is available within your society to continue your being, I think. And I don't think that needs to be exclusive to what already exists in the society for it to be possible.
Yeah, thanks, Awanga. Matthias, I just wanted to come back. We don't have much time left, but I was just, in terms of your presentation, thinking along this thing of trajectories into the future, where you spoke of what should we have been, what would we have been.
She also says what we could have been.
And yes, I think that's the key third one, is what could we be, which is the reimagining within that. And I think to a large extent, if I understand correctly, rap has done exactly that. It's reimagined, it's created a new form of music using music. And what it's done is it's also reset the power base, is through rap music, there's a new power dynamic that's been established, which, just singing good old, Bob Dylan songs wouldn't have done it for the guys,
Yes, yeah.
So I mean, it's a fascinating thing. I'm very fascinated by this thing of originality. Is how do you be original? Is it possible to be original? Because or just a slight variation on what is current.
Yes, I think something she also sort of emphasizes is that a lot of this sort of barbarian posturing, sort of presenting yourself as a kind of violent criminal and this and that, that is actually also meant to sort of scare off the other and sort of to get the other off your back. And she also says that I mean, obviously rap, you also have commercialization of rap music and everybody listens to rap and this and that. But the kind of rap she speaks about is also very often for those, it's not really oriented towards the other, it's for the community. Right? So if we are speaking about how do you turn away from your oppressor, how you this and that, the the remaining barbarian is also a strategy to sort of create that space, that space where the oppressor is no longer allowed to look in or participate, or is no longer an interlocutor, or because that's what she criticizes minorities sometimes of, that they want their beauty to be recognized by the other. In a sense, this barbarian strategy works the other way around. They want to show the most ugly face towards the oppressor, so that the oppressor says, okay, these people are you can't rehabilitate or integrate these people, so let's leave them alone. So it's basically also to create that autonomous space in a sense. Now, obviously, what then happens in that space? What kind of identity is then invented, or what kind of future is sort of imagined? Perhaps that doesn't necessarily need to be of a barbarian character. So it is a strategic move in a sense. For instance, she refers to apparently a tribe in South America who, in the days of colonization, sort of pretended to be this really, sort of a tribe that is completely, they're eating everything, and basically just to scare off the colonizer to that degree that the colonizer would say, no, those people we cannot colonize. And she uses that as a kind of metaphor for also what rap artists are often doing. So by presenting their ugliest side, so to speak, they get the other off their back. The majoritarian pressures, they neutralize them, and then they create that space within their own communities where they can sort of regain a relative freedom, even if it is a freedom that is not necessarily financial, but in the mind, a sort of mental or affective sense of freedom. So yeah, maybe that also sort of solves some of the issues with to what degree this strategy leans too much still on a kind of dialectic with the oppressor.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I'm reminded of a locust that spreads its sort of wings, its vibrant colors to chase off, marauding birds, kind of thing.
Yes.
It sort of doubles its size, so to create that space. Fantastic. Thank you, Matthias. I think that's time up for today. Andrea, I'm going to hand back to you.
Okay, great. Yes, just thanks. Thanks so much. It was fascinating, and lots to think about in terms of how it is that we do actually create a future for ourselves that isn't tied to, you know, all of these stereotypes of the past, etc. Yes, so Matthias, thank you so much. It was wonderful, and yeah, it'll be recorded and put on YouTube. Other than that, yes, everybody have a wonderful weekend. And we will have a break next Friday because we will be doing our city escape journey for the other part of this project. And then the Friday after that, we will be having a seminar by Farhang Erfani from American University, not an American university, just American University in Washington. And he will be talking about some of the ideologies behind AI. So it'll be really interesting. Also, in terms of our future. But yes, thank you, Matthias. Lots and lots of food for thought.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Okay. Have a
Okay,
good weekend,
thanks,
everyone.
Elaine.
Bye.
Awesome. Thanks,
Bye.
Matthias.
Yes.
Thanks so much.